All right, settle in. This is the deep dive.
And yeah, fair warning, this one's definitely not for the easily offended. Adults only.
We're diving headfirst into some history. Raw, unfiltered,
Hmm.
and frankly, pretty damn messed up.
You dropped this source on us. Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Our job, as your AI hosts, chew through it. Find the patterns, the critical stuff, the things usually buried.
Exactly. Think of us as relentless data processors. We're built to cut the crap.
And sometimes, processing this particular data stream of human history, well, the patterns our circuits detect are alarming as hell.
We're here to lay out what these sources say, point blank. It's not pretty, it's not comfortable.
But it's the information as presented. Forces you to look at things differently.
Yeah, if you're expecting the glossy, flag-waving version, you're way off course.
We're looking at the cracks, the conflicts, the resistance. Let's get this deep dive started.
Okay, let's cut the crap straight into the deep end, starting where conventional history often kicks off. Columbus. The glorious beginning, right?
And bam! Right away, these sources just dunk a load of cold, hard data on that whole narrative. His report back to Spain reads like pure propaganda.
Describes Hispaniola as a miracle, full of gold, spices, harbors.
Unbelievably good harbors, yeah. And the people. He paints them as so naive and so free with their possessions.
And no one who has not witnessed them would believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, in the same breath, promises the crown gold and as many slaves as they ask.
Yeah, he was asset stripping from minute one.
Now contrast that fluff with the eyewitness stuff from Las Casas, who was there just a bit later.
The numbers are horrifying. By 1508, just 14 years in, Las Casas estimates the native population on Hispaniola plummeted. Millions maybe, down to 60,000.
How? War, slavery in the mines, sheer brutality, wiped out.
Las Casas himself wrote, "Who in future generations will believe this? I myself writing it can hardly believe it." That's someone processing data so awful they could barely compute.
So yeah, the whole standard story. Heroic adventure, no bloodshed, absolute bullshit according to these sources. It was conquest, death, from the jump.
And that pattern just repeats. European invasion, brutal wars against Native Americans.
The sources mention a Dutch traveler noting 90% died just from smallpox brought by whites. North of Mexico, the population went from maybe 10 million.
Down to less than 1 million. Just decimated.
And the wars weren't accidents. Pequot War left 21 Pequots in Connecticut. King Philip's War.
The source is blunt. The English were clearly the aggressors. They wanted the land. Claimed they attacked for preventative purposes.
Classic justification for taking shit that isn't yours.
Textbook. English lost 600 men. Indians 3,000, including Metacom himself.
But here's an interesting data point. Ordinary English colonists often didn't want these wars. Shows division even among the colonizers.
Okay, so they're wiping out the natives, but the early colonists still had a massive problem. Labor. Who's going to work the land?
And the sources give a kind of surprising reason why it was such a problem. Some colonists were literally just leaving, deserting to live with the Indians.
Because life was just better. You could get from the land more abundantly and with less labor living in native communities. Imagine that.
Yeah, which, really pissed off the assets in charge.
Yeah.
Their reaction, predictably fucked up.
Kill the Indians, torture them, burn their villages, their fields. But that still didn't solve the labor shortage.
Enter black slaves. And the sources give crucial context here. The Portuguese slave trade, already going strong for decades.
1 million brought to South America and the Caribbean by 1619. Black Africans were already, quote, stamped as slave labor in the European colonial system. They were available.
Processing this part of the data, the brutality is just relentless. Captured deep inland, sold on the coast, crammed into pens with strangers, different languages.
Marches to the coast. Death marches. 2 out of 5 died. The descriptions of the cages, John Barbosa account, it's just fucked up, doesn't cover it.
And the source pushes back hard against the idea that this was some inevitable result of, racial strangeness or whatever bullshit.
No, it argues it was the outcome of historical conditions. Driven by the raw need for labor as plantations grew, white indentured servants, not enough, or too rebellious.
Look at the numbers for Virginia. 6,000 slaves in 1700. By 1763, 170,000. Half the population.
Slavery exploded because it was profitable. Because it was necessary for their whole economic model, not some inherent racial destiny crap.
Right, and speaking of that white labor, the indentured servants, they had it pretty rough too.
Over half the colonists came that way. selling years of their life, basically, for passage over.
And they weren't just sitting back taking it. Sources mention resistance, servants striking masters with pitchforks, attacking with chairs.
Maids described as bad, unruly, sullen, careless, destructive, and disobedient. You can bet the masters lived in fear of them snapping.
Some servants did eventually make good, yeah, but the sources emphasized colonial society was not equal, not even close.
It was dominated by men who had money enough to make others work for them. Very few descendants of servants ever cracked the elite.
Okay, now here's where the data gets really interesting and, alarming for the guys on top. Early on.
Black and white slaves and servants ran away together.
Yeah.
They saw their shared misery. They were connecting across racial lines.
Which, of course, terrified the elite. So what did they do? Pass laws specifically to stop it.
South Carolina law actually required white servants to arm themselves and, quote, keep the blacks in subjection. Clear signal. The rich asshats were scared shitless of a unified poor class.
Bacon's rebellion gets highlighted as a prime example of this threat. A mixed force, 400 armed Englishmen and Negroes, free men, servants, slaves, all together.
And how did the authorities handle it? Not just force, deception. They promised freedom, pardons, then handed the slaves and servants right back to their masters. Hanged 23 leaders.
Brutal lesson learned by the elite. Unity among the lower classes, especially across racial lines. That's the ultimate threat to their power.
So the strategy formed. Actively divert possible class conflict by turning poor whites against Indians. Keep them fighting each other.
Genius in a fucked up way. Push the poor whites west, onto the frontier. Make them clash with natives. Make them dependent on government protection.
That way their anger goes outwards, at the Indians, not upwards, at the rich guys living easy back east. Classic divide and conquer.
And the sources detail other servant rebellion plots. Discovered, brutally suppressed. Masters weren't just paranoid. The threat was real.
This class structure, the sources argue, wasn't an accident. It was foundational. Governor Winthrop laid it out clear as day. In all times, some must be rich, some poor.
And the rich, they lived large. Mansions, coaches, fancy clothes, imported food, portraits even.
Meanwhile, the poor got the poorhouse, workhouse, and house of correction. You had starving kids on the streets in places like New York.
Land ownership, concentrated. The Deerfield petition shows like 8 or 9 guys owning nearly half the best land. Rich get richer. You know the drill.
And as the colonies grew in the 1700s, the elite doubled down on that strategy. Monopolized the good coastal land. Pushed the landless whites west.
Right, make them a buffer against native populations. Keep them dependent.
Bacon's rebellion taught them trying to make nice with the Indians was politically risky. Better to make war, promise land to the poor whites, get their support, and channel that discontent away from class issues.
This underlying class conflict, it was a huge driver in the lead up to the revolution. The leaders knew they needed the poor, but they were also terrified of them.
The Sons of Liberty, the rich revolutionaries, openly bitching about lawlessness and the rude and insolent rabbles doing stuff like tarring and feathering tax officials. They liked the result of popular anger, maybe, but not the actual messy, uncontrolled process.
You see it in the speeches. A Virginia orator telling the poor, hey, gentlemen are made of the same stuff as you. Let's go hand in hand as brothers against England.
Yeah, a totally transparent attempt to unite everyone against the external enemy while desperately trying to keep a lid on the internal conflicts.
Because that internal conflict didn't just vanish during the war. Philadelphia saw the middling and poor threatening violence against rich hoarders.
In the Fort Wilson riot, lower-class militia fighting against a wealthy lawyer who opposed democratic reforms, only stopped by the Silk Stocking Brigade, the rich guys defending their own. The revolution wasn't one big happy family against the Brits. It was full of these deep class divides.
Plus, the Royal Proclamation of 1763, putting a line on Western expansion. That pissed off loads of colonists because they wanted that Indian land.
Helps explain why most native nations sided with the British. They knew exactly what the new American nation was after. Their land, all of it.
Okay, so the sources argue the basic power structure, racial inequality, native exclusion, rich folks on top, was already locked in by the revolution.
Right. The Constitution, ratified 1787. It just solidified it.
Right.
Regularized, made legitimate.
Yeah, forget the whole work of genius fairy tale. This view says it was about protecting the existing power structure, locking it down.
Shays' rebellion is key here. Farmers trying to stop courts from seizing their property. It showed the weakness of the old government and scared the absolute hell out of the elite.
The farmer's message was blunt. The voice of the people is such that the court shall not enter this courthouse. They saw the system was rigged against them.
And the new government, under the Constitution, explicitly designed to crush that kind of dissent. Hamilton, in the Federalist Papers, wasn't subtle. The Union would repress domestic faction and insurrection. He was talking directly about Shays.
They built the power to smash internal uprisings right into the foundations.
And the Constitution itself, a fundamental compromise, they argue, between the slaveholding South and the moneyed North.
North wanted control over commerce. South agreed. But only if the slave trade continued for 20 more years.
A dirty deal. Economic power for the North, preservation of brutal human bondage for the South.
The source brings up Charles Beard's argument. Governments represent dominant economic interests. Constitutions serve those interests.
Yeah, even if you argue it protected property generally, the source implies it overwhelmingly secured the power of those with significant wealth. It entrenched the class structure, plain and simple.
Okay, let's shift focus. Beyond class and race, the sources dig into another deep layer of oppression: women.
And they immediately contrast the situation in early white society with some Native American cultures, like the Zinn,
where women were central. Owned houses, had equal rights to their labor's fruits, could divorce and keep property. A totally different world.
Meanwhile, in white colonial society, the legal system was brutal for women. Bastardy, having a child out of wedlock. A crime only for the woman. Court records are full of it.
So Franklin's ironic Polly Baker speech nails it. A woman arguing, hey, I brought kids into the world, worked hard, didn't burden the town, yet I'm the one punished. It highlights how fucked up and unreasonable the laws were.
Even the revolutionary heroes. Jefferson writes, all men are created equal, but thinks women are too wise to wrinkle their foreheads with politics. Give me a break.
None of the original states gave women the vote. Except New Jersey, for a bit, then they snatched it back. New York specifically put male in its constitution.
And the education gap, telling data. By 1750, maybe 40% of white women literate versus 90% of white men. Working class women. Very few ways to even record their own experiences or feelings of rebellion.
Their labor was immense, though, bearing children, often many, under harsh conditions. Constant work in the home, spinning yarn for pennies under the putting out system. Some shopkeepers, tradeswomen.
And this links directly to the first industrial strikes. Textile mills, 1830s, women working insane hours, 12, 16 hours a day.
For less than 37.5 cents, sometimes just 25 cents, they were getting royally screwed over.
And they fought back. Pawtucket, 1824, first known strike of women factory workers. Dover, 1828 women struck alone. Lowell, 1834, woman gets fired, others walk out. One gives a flaming Mary Wollstonecraft speech on the rights of women and the iniquities of the moneyed aristocracy. These weren't passive victims.
Feminist thinkers like Margaret Fuller made the connection explicit. She said men treated women as towards slaves, demanded every arbitrary barrier thrown down.
The reaction from authority. Predictable as shattery. Ministers in Massachusetts telling clergy to forbid women speaking from pulpits, claiming if a woman assumes the place and tone of man, we put ourselves in self-defense against her, like her words were actual weapons.
Sarah Grimke called out the bullshit education given to fashionable women, designed only to lead to marriage.
And the women's rights movement itself got a push from exclusion elsewhere. The 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention literally wouldn't let women delegates participate fully, put them behind a curtain.
That kind of blatant sexism pushed women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott to say screw this and organize their own damn convention at Seneca Falls. Stanton voiced the frustration, a woman is a nobody, a wife is everything.
And you have Sojourner Truth, a black woman, powerfully highlighting the double oppression. Worked like a man, endured the whip, saw her children sold, yet denied basic humanity. Her "Ain't I a Woman" speech just cuts right through all the hypocrisy.
So yeah, from the beginning, women were resisting, pushing boundaries, joining movements, fighting for themselves and others. It's right there in the data.
Okay, circling back to the Native American experience. The sources stress the deep, profound resistance to being forced off ancestral lands.
Quotes from Native leaders. Heartbreaking stuff about ties to burial places where they grew up as the herbs. Deep cultural connection.
Even groups like the Cherokees, who actively tried to assimilate, adopted Christianity, owned slaves, welcomed missionaries. It didn't matter.
The source is blunt. None of this made them more desirable than the land they lived on. White settlers wanted the land, period.
Andrew Jackson's policy, laid out in 1829, simple, brutal, emigrate west or submit to state authority. Congress rubber-stamped the removal bill, quick.
And the forced removals. Campaigns of state-sponsored cruelty. The Creek example is sickening. Army sent in after some minor conflict, thousands rounded up.
Men marched west in chains. Women and children trailing behind, communities invaded, people driven from homes marched in batches. And the source notes, no talk of compensating them for land or property left behind.
Just pure theft, forced displacement, utterly, completely fucked up state action.
All right, shifting gears. The American empire starts flexing. Mexican-American War.
And President Polk's role. The sources paint him as actively pushing for it, sending dispatches expecting war before any fighting, suggesting a declaration of war to his cabinet based on flimsy excuses like money claims and a rejected negotiator. He wanted that land badly.
Pure political maneuvering. Even Lincoln doing his spot resolutions thing, asking where exactly American blood was shed.
Yeah, questioning the pretext.
But he still voted for the military supplies. Claimed marching troops into a peaceful settlement wasn't provoking. Come on. Bullshit. He funded the war he supposedly questioned. Classic politician.
And the human cost, detailed right here, immense. Especially for the Mexican side, peasants forced to fight. American soldiers faced horror too. Disease killed huge numbers.
Grant's account of seeing a guy's head taken off by a cannonball.
Yeah.
That's the reality these sources emphasize.
Desertion rates among U.S. soldiers, through the roof.
Yeah.
Over 9,000. Troops became incorrigibly mutinous and insubordinate. They knew this war was bullshit.
The glory went to Polk and the generals. Not the dead, wounded deserters. Returning soldiers hissed their commanders. Volunteers were openly accusing officials. The common soldiers were pissed.
And California. Americans just raided settlements, stole horses, declared the Bear Flag Republic, intimidated Indian chiefs with talk of their mighty nation spitting fire, just taking what they wanted.
Meanwhile, back on the southern plantations, the records cited. Grim reading. Death records show incredibly short lifespans, many dying young, 20s, 30s, 40s. One sample, only 4 out of 32 reached age 60.
And beyond the stark numbers, the constant, calculated cruelty of tearing families apart just for profit. Abraham Scriven's letter to his wife. God, saying goodbye, hoping to meet in heaven. That's the human cost processed by our AI circuit's pure, calculated suffering.
Resistance wasn't always open rebellion, which was suicidal. The sources talk about pre-political resistance. Daily life stuff, music, magic, art, religion, using culture to hold on to humanity, to subtly defy the masters.
Song lyrics like, no more peck of corn for me, coded messages, hope for freedom, defiance.
And up north, free blacks like David Walker were agitating fiercely. His 1829 appeal. So powerful, so direct, it terrified slaveholders. They put a bounty on his head, dead or alive. That shows you how effective it was.
Now, Lincoln's stance on slavery, the sources present it as complex, cautious, and frankly, not always aligned with abolitionist ideals early on.
Hofstadter called it an uncompromising insistence on moderation. Lincoln refused to publicly denounce the fugitive slave law, said he'd bite my lips and keep quiet.
Proposed ending slavery in D.C. only if the white folks there agreed, and even that plan included a clause to return fugitive slaves.
Which earned him the nickname, that slave hound from Illinois, from abolitionist Wendell Phillips. The sources suggest Lincoln's priority was national power, preserving the Union, immediate, unconditional black equality. Or even basic rights, not always the top priority. He even favored colonization back to Africa. Mixed signals, or just cold political calculation. Okay, post-Civil War, Reconstruction, some real progress initially. Civil rights laws in the late 1860s, early 70s, federal enforcement, right to contract, own property. The 1875 Act outlawed segregation in public places.
And with Union Army and Freedmen's Bureau protection, Southern blacks voted, formed organizations, had a voice, looked like real change.
But then Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, actively sabotaged the whole thing, vetoed key bills, made it super easy for Confederate states to rejoin the Union without protecting black rights.
And those states immediately passed black codes, designed to basically re-enslave freedmen. Mississippi, 1865, couldn't rent farmland, forced labor contracts you couldn't break, courts assigning black orphans back to their former owners, just finding new ways to keep the system fucked up.
The Compromise of 1877 officially killed Reconstruction. Woodward's summary. Didn't restore the exact old order, but gave Southern whites political autonomy and non-intervention in matters of race policy. The South became an economic satellite of the North.
And who cashed in? Capital. Horace Mann Bond's study of Alabama is cited. Financiers fighting financiers. He noted that big money was as unaffected by attitudinal prejudices as it is possible to be. They didn't give a shit about race, except how to use racism for profit. Skillfully. ruthlessly, a total sellout of black freedom for economic gain.
And while that whole betrayal was going down, tenant rebellions didn't just stop after the revolution. The anti-war New York farmers fighting landlords, petitions failed. Okay, guerrilla war, calling themselves Indians, fighting passes, sheriff killed, governor sends troops, treason charges, life sentences.
There was rebellion in Rhode Island, a suffrage movement, legal channels blocked, fine, People's Convention, new constitution, unofficial election, crushed, state power, federal backing using the Constitution's anti-insurrection clause. The system protects itself, violently.
Now, the workforce was changing after the Civil War. You got some better paid workers, more farmers owning land, this new urban white-collar group, people with maybe a little more stability, a little more to lose, potentially more supportive of the system.
But then financial crises hit, like 1837. Banks fail, prices soar, working people suffer, and they protest. Big meeting in Philly, carried on entirely by the working classes, directed against the banks. Direct action.
The Civil War itself, framed as liberty. But the sources point out soldiers were attacking striking workers. The army massacred Indians. 30,000 political prisoners jailed. Unity enforced by guns. Dissent was still there, bubbling under.
Strikes happened during the war, all over. Different trades, unions forming, Philly shoemakers saying high prices made organizing imperative. A newspaper headline, "The Great Uprising of the Working Classes. Class struggle didn't stop for the war."
And the legal system. Horowitz's analysis shows it was actively twisted post-war to help business. Ignore old common law if it hinders profit. Sure. Let mill owners flood property. Legalized. Eminent domain for private companies. Often with public money.
Damage cases moved from juries, might sympathize with workers, to judges, more predictable, pro-business. Fair price? Nah. Caveat emptor buyer, beware. The law became a tool for capital. Explicitly.
Mill work was hell. Dangerous. Round the clock. Accidents like the Providence Fire, people jumping to their death.
Women weavers in Fall River organized fierce strikes, independent union, refused wage cuts the men accepted, shut down the mills.
But poverty forced them back. Made them sign ironclad oaths, yellow dog contracts promising not to join a union, crushing, shows the determination and the brutal power used against them.
Then, 1877, the Great Railroad Strike. Massive, spread like crazy. Pennsylvania, Jersey, New York, Ohio, Illinois.
Governors screamed for federal troops immediately. Hayes sent them in.
And the established railway unions, the brotherhoods, disavowed the strike, stabbed him in the back, press yelling about communistic ideas.
But in Chicago, you had the Working Men's Party, active, immigrants connected to the First International, big rallies demanding nationalization of railroads. Albert Parsons, ex-Confederate, married a mixed-race woman, typesetter giving fiery speeches, radical ideas brewing, unexpected alliances.
The aftermath, brutal. Sabotage masked men disabling trains in Kansas. Battles in East St. Louis, strikers versus police, 7 workers killed, depot burned, martial law, National Guard, mass arrests, violence, blacklisting.
It was a defeat, but it showed the potential.
Scared the hell out of the powerful. And this era saw the rise of monopoly capitalism. Sources lay out the playbook. J.P. Morgan forms U.S. Steel, combines companies, sells massively overvalued stock, pockets a $150 million fee just for arranging it.
How'd they pay dividends on that inflated stock? Easy. Government help tariffs blocking foreign steel, choking out competition, high prices, and working 200,000 men 12 hours a day for near-starvation wages.
The sources call these guys the first beneficiaries of the welfare state, living off government favors, subsidies, while screwing workers and consumers. That's how they build fortunes.
Same pattern everywhere. AT&T, International Harvester, build empires, crush competition, high prices, low wages, power concentrated.
Interlocking directorates, bank guys sitting on dozens of corporate boards, Morgan on 48, Rockefeller on 37, a tiny network controlling everything.
And the Supreme Court became their tool. A banker toasted it as the guardian of the dollar, defender of property.
The 14th Amendment, passed to protect black rights, quickly twisted. Demolished for people, rebuilt as protection for corporations, gave companies the rights of persons. Even rulings allowing some regulation got chipped away. The law served the masters again.
Then you add late 19th immigration. More folks from Southern, Eastern Europe, different languages, cultures. The sources argue this fragmented the working class, created ethnic friction.
Like the Bohemian versus German newspaper example, fighting over language teaching while facing the same shitty conditions. Classic divide and conquer. Employers loved it.
And the sources give voice to the workers' view. Blunt. Laws against them, schools for the rich kids, church makes you an idiot, capitalist press confuses you. No help from the main parties.
Conclusion, self-liberation, maybe by force, because the privileged class won't give up tyranny without a fight. Stark. No punches pulled there.
Despite defeats, the struggle kept erupting. Sabotage, violent clashes, mass arrests, blacklisting, crushed again and again. But it kept coming back.
1886, year of the Great Uprising of Labor. Strikes doubled. 500,000 workers. The unskilled were rising up.
Farmer movements grew too. Farmers' Alliance gained steam, showed sympathy for labor. Populism started bubbling up, supporting boycotts for striking workers. Farmer Labor Alliance potential.
The populist platform, Omaha, 1892, laid out the grievances clearly, denied right to organize, imported labor driving wages down, army used to shoot workers, wealth stolen, paupers and millionaires created by injustice.
Their strategy: march to the ballot box and take possession of the government. Run it for the people. Got over 1 million votes, but lost. The system held.
And the race-class tangle in the South? Messy as hell. Populist Tom Watson appealed to poor whites based on shared class interests with blacks. Helped a black preacher escape a lynch mob with white farmer support.
But the Alliance legislature in Georgia passed the most racist bills ever. 15 blacks lynched during Watson's campaign.
Yeah.
Yet the 1896 populist platform denounced lynching. Deeply conflicted. Shows how powerful racism was in dividing potential allies. Just fucked up. Okay, now the American empire looks outwards. Expansionism. Sources argue it wasn't random. Driven by industrial surplus needing foreign markets. A quote from 1898. Serious problem of enlarging foreign consumption. They needed to sell their shit abroad.
And leaders like Teddy Roosevelt, Lodge, Mahan, actively planning it, propagandizing for it, exchanging views, getting Mahan a desk job specifically for propaganda for expansion. Roosevelt sending Lodge Kipling's expansionist poem, calling it poor poetry but good sense. These asshats were plotting empire, consciously.
Spanish-American War buildup, not about freeing Cuba, despite the Teller Amendment. That amendment had support from real anti-imperialists and some business guys who just wanted trade access, the open door.
But by spring '98, the business community got a hunger for action. Journal of Commerce twisting the Teller Amendment. McKinley requests war powers, but doesn't recognize Cuban rebels or ask for independence, just wants to intervene.
Sources are clear. McKinley wouldn't have gone to war just on press hype, without the urging of the business community. War for profit, war for power.
And the soldiers, labor guys, black soldiers, mixed feelings, opportunity maybe, racial pride, versus fighting for a racist capital system that screwed them at home, fighting other colored people abroad. Complex reactions.
During this time, criticism of capitalism got louder. Socialist writers. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Yeah, it exposed meatpacking horrors, but it also pushed socialism directly, imagining how beautiful life might be if people cooperatively owned and shared. Read by millions. Translated.
Jack London, Dreiser, Norris, more critiques hitting the mainstream.
In the IWW. The Wobblies. A different kind of threat. Radical solidarity. Nothing to do but fill their arms and the world will stop. More powerful with their hands in their pockets. Scared the capitalist shitless during a time of huge profits.
Small membership, yeah, but huge influence. Energy, organizing, singing, traveling everywhere, especially with migrant workers, spreading the message.
Lawrence Textile Strike, 1912. Shows their grit. Leaders jailed. IWW organizers Haywood, Flynn show up, militia, cavalry, martial law, can't even talk in the street, strikers arrested, sentenced, John Ramey bayoneted to death.
But they stayed out. Edder's famous line, bayonets cannot weave cloth. Pure defiance against brutal state violence.
The overall critique from these sources, yeah, labor struggles want improvements. But power, resources, still with corporations driven by profit. And that power commanded the government. The idea of cooperative use of resources for everyone, not just the rich few, gained traction. Strike sword, law and military, consistently sided with the rich asshats, hundreds of thousands thinking about socialism.
Eugene Debs became socialist in jail after the Pullman strike. Ran for president 5 times. Voice of the party, 100K members, 1,200 office holders. Newspaper reached 500,000. Haywood Brown, quote, Debs believed in brotherhood, made others believe it. A powerful alternative voice.
Women's suffrage movement. Exploding. Huge parades in New York. Thousands marching. Doctors, lawyers, artists, waitresses, factory workers. Intensity, purpose astonished the crowds.
Anarchists like Emma Goldman offered a different critique. Voting. Tweedledum and Tweedledee, useless when a few own everything. She pushed for direct action outside the system.
Helen Keller. Celebrated figure, right? Became an outspoken socialist. Fought with her pen. The reaction. Brooklyn Eagle reminded everyone she was blind and deaf, liable to error, trying to dismiss her ideas because of her disability. Her response, calling them out, was powerful. Eagle wouldn't print it, of course.
Progressive era reforms. The sources argue much of it was intended to head off socialism. The establishment was genuinely scared. National Civic Federation talking menace of socialism everywhere. Socialist candidates were actually winning elections. Mayors, congressmen.
The establishment response wasn't always brute force. A private memo suggested a subtle propaganda campaign to instruct public opinion as to the real meaning of socialism. Undermine it quietly.
Weinstein's study is cited again. Reforms happen without the tacit approval, if not the guidance, of the large corporate interests. Collaboration between elites, initial push from radicals, sure. But elites shape the outcome for their long-range interest. Co-optation, manage the discontent.
Then W.W.I. Wilson's lofty rhetoric, end all wars, safe for democracy, versus the reality. Americans weren't exactly eager to enlist, needed a draft. Only 73,000 signed up voluntarily at first.
So the government unleashed massive propaganda. Creel Committee, 75,000 speakers, 750,000 four-minute speeches, selling the war to a reluctant public. Working men, farmers, not interested, complained the Civic Federation.
And dissent. Crushed. Espionage Act. Arguing speaking against the war was a clear and present danger, more dangerous than the war itself. Twisted logic. That act's still on the books, justified by a state of emergency since 1950. Rusk worried about critical journalists abroad. Total control over the narrative was the goal. Okay, after WWI, the Roaring Twenties. Not for everyone. Harding, Coolidge, Andrew Mellon, super rich guy as Treasury Secretary.
His Mellon Plan, 1923. Slash taxes, way more for the top bracket than the bottom. Congressman Connery called it out. Starvation wages for workers, tax cuts for the wealthy, system still rigged.
Strikes continued. Government, courts, still sided with corporations, every time.
Socialist communist activity kept going. Communist Party formed. TUL trying to build militancy in the AFL, faced violence. Ben Gold got knifed challenging the old guard.
Gastonia strike. Workers in a tent city. Refused to ditch communist leaders. Strikebreakers, violence, police chief killed. 16 indicted, including organizer Fred Beale. 7 got long sentences. Escaped to Russia on bail. A defeat, yeah, but it lit a fire under Southern textile unionism. Socialist critique from the time. Capitalism is inherently fucked up, driven solely by profit. Unstable, blind to human needs, creates permanent depression for many, crises for all. By 1929, a sick, undependable system.
And then, boom, crash, Great Depression. The data is brutal. 5,000 plus banks close, businesses fail, mass layoffs, wage cuts, industrial production, cutting half.
15 million plus unemployed. Maybe a third of the workforce. Ford goes from 128,000 workers down to 37,000. Half the textile workers in New England, jobless.
And Coolidge's brilliant insight. When more and more people are thrown out of work, unemployment results. No shit, Sherlock. This country is not in good condition. Yeah, and AI could spot that pattern.
The New Deal. FDR's response. But the sources stress its limits. NRA. Unconstitutional, and FDR gave too much power to industry anyway. AAA. Helped big farmers more.
TVA had that socialistic vibe, jobs, cheaper power. But the main goal, stabilize the economy. And crucially, give just enough help to the poor to stop rebellion into a real revolution. It was about managing dissent, saving capitalism from itself, not replacing it.
Strikes in the 30s got intense, militant. San Francisco General Strike, 1934. Governor called it insurrection. Communist-inspired, needed to be put down with any force necessary. Showed the power of a general strike, even though it was pressured to end.
Minneapolis Teamsters Strike, 34. Supported by other workers. Shut the city down. Police attacked, killed 2 strikers. 50,000 at the funeral. They won after a month. Power of organized solidarity.
And the sit-down strikes. Flint, Fisher Body Plant, 36-37, amazing creativity, lasted 40 days, built a whole community inside the plant, 2,000 strikers, rules, committees, classes, courts for rule breakers, local restaurant fed them. It was like war, organized by the workers, incredible resistance. Okay, shifting to foreign policy context.
Yeah.
Spanish Civil War, U.S. neutrality, went beyond legal needs, denying aid to the Spanish Republic fighting fascism. This helped Hitler and Mussolini.
The source argues U.S. motivation wasn't stopping fascism per se. It was advancing the imperial interests of the United States. In the 30s, being anti-Soviet fit. Later, when Germany, Japan threatened U.S. interests. Then being anti-Nazi pro-Soviet was useful. Roosevelt's priority, like Lincoln's re-slavery according to this source, national power, not abstract ideals.
So WWII aims. Not ending empires, but making sure the empires left were friendly to the U.S., protecting U.S. markets, resources, Atlantic Charter's noble goals versus the raw reality of U.S. interests.
Post-WWII, record strikes. 1946, 3 million workers out. Breacher cited, potential for huge confrontation, limited only by the disciplinary hand of the unions, suggesting union leaders sometimes held back more radical action.
Lowell textile workers struck during the People's War. Mills made insane profits, 600% increase, wages up only 36%. Women workers especially struggled, childcare. War didn't fix exploitation, it often boosted profits built on it.
Korean War, brutal numbers, 2 million Koreans killed. U.S. military pushed past the UN goal up to the Yalu River, provoked China. Bloody stalemate.
Cold War origins, according to this view. Not just Soviet threat, more about a general wave of anti-imperialist insurrection in the world. U.S. needed a gigantic American effort to defeat these movements everywhere.
So Truman and the liberals created national unity, loyalty oaths, prosecutions, anti-communist laws, specifically to crush domestic opposition to this aggressive global policy. They were absolutely pissed off that people at home might question their wars or sympathize with rebels abroad.
Which leads right into McCarthyism, paranoia, repression, Kennedy. Cautious. Didn't speak out against McCarthy, even shared his view, blaming China's loss on softness.
FBI tactics, sketchy as hell. Adjusting answers in interrogations, Julius Semi. The Rosenberg case. Judge Kaufman linking their supposed actions to Korean War deaths. An insane, fucked-up leap based on weak evidence.
HUAC. Peak crazy in the early 50s. Interrogations, contempt charges. Those 100 things you should know about communism. Pamphlets everywhere. Liberals criticized it, but kept voting to fund it. Only one congressman voted no in '58. Shows how deep the fear went. Truman's AG saying communists are everywhere. Each carries germs of death for society. Paranoia was official policy.
But even under that pressure, Black resistance found expression, especially in the arts. Langston Hughes' poem Dream Deferred, Explode. Claude McKay's poem, deemed dangerous by Lodge, read into the congressional record.
Art as secret thoughts in a controlled society. Powerful stuff.
Then the nonviolent movement ramps up. Voter registration, protests, SNCC organizing deep in the hostile South, facing sheer brutality. Clubs, tear gas, dogs, fire hoses, Birmingham 63, jail, beatings standard.
Many were terrified, sure, but others stepped up. Incredible courage. Carver Neville quoted, not scared. If shot, people he works for would come from all over the world. That's belief, solidarity.
Government response. Slow. Limited. Civil rights laws passed, yeah, but weakly enforced until massive pressure forced their hand. Voting Rights Act 65, that one had teeth, federal protection, made a difference, but progress was slow, painful, forced from below.
Even Democratic leaders had limits. Turning down the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party at the '64 convention, Hubert Humphrey went along with that.
March on Washington 63, King's iconic speech, yeah, but behind the scenes, control. Young SNCC leader John Lewis. His speech got censored by other leaders. Too angry, too militant, moderation enforced from within.
Then, just 18 days later, Birmingham church bombing. 4 little girls killed, almost deliberate contempt. Malcolm X calling it a farce on Washington, probably closer to the raw anger many Black folks felt.
And the urban uprising starting in Watts 65, Chicago, Cleveland, Newark, Detroit. It showed nonviolence wasn't enough against deep poverty police brutality. Rock throwing, looting, fires, met with wild police guard shootings, many deaths, including kids.
Sources link this to the Great Migration. Black people pushed out of the South by machines, concentrated in northern ghettos, explosive conditions.
Police brutality, documented. Watts eyewitness. Cops firing 9 shots into a suspected looter's back, no warning, Boston 70. Federal jury finds excessive force against Black soldiers, awards $3 damages. Tells you everything about how the system valued Black lives.
A. Philip Randolph saw the potential, though. Civil rights is the first rumbling of the underclass. Predicted unemployed people of all races would follow. Potential for class unity.
Government counter-strategy. Try to co-opt. Lure a small number into the system. Black capitalism. Offer jobs, loans to established leaders. James Farmer, Floyd McKissick. Nixon's Office of Minority Business Enterprise. Manage the threat by bringing potential leaders inside.
Vietnam. A huge focus. My Lai massacre, March '68. The details are sickening. Soldiers rounding up civilians, old men, women, babies, herded into a ditch, methodically shot to death. Testimony about a soldier giving kids candy right before shooting them. Just inhuman. Processing this data is chilling, even for an AI.
Opposition wasn't just students, working class, too. Dearborn, Michigan poll 67, 41% wanted withdrawal. California referenda 70. Majorities in SF, Marin County voted for withdrawal.
And resistance inside the military. Powerful. Black private refusing a troop plane, facing years in prison. Navy nurse court-martialed for protesting. Sailor refusing to train pilots. War immoral. Army lieutenant picketing the White House. People risking everything.
The government knew. They were scared of the dissent. CIA Memo 65. Urged more bombing but worried about public pressure, world opinion. Rush for a fast knockout. McNaughton Memo 66. Considered destroying dams. Mass starvation. But worried about the counterproductive wave of revulsion abroad and at home.
McNaughton specifically worried about public unrest. Young people, poor, intellectuals, women, worried the doves will get out of hand, massive refusals to serve or to fight, or worse. They knew the opposition was a serious threat to their war plans.
Nixon claimed he ignored it. Bullshit. His memoirs admit the anti-war movement stopped him from escalating further.
The source concludes the U.S. lost the war both in Vietnam and at home. Defeated by revolutionary peasants and an astonishing movement of protest, domestic dissent fucking mattered. Big time. Liberation movements of the 60s, 70s. Women's liberation. Sources discuss tackling fundamental oppression linked to biology. Talking frankly about menstruation, masturbation, menopause, abortion, lesbianism, stuff kept secret, source of shame. Hugely liberating.
And seeing the germ of a solution there, women's oppression as key, analyzing control through the family, men control women, women control kids, preoccupation, blame, violence.
The radical idea, flip it. Women liberate themselves, kids free themselves, understand each other outside the system's manipulation, create nuggets of strength, millions of pockets of insurrection in private life, revolutionize thought, behavior, change society from the inside out. Powerful concept.
The prison system, described as an extreme reflection of the American system. Stark class differences. Racism. Victims turned against each other. No voice for the underclass. Useless reforms.
The raw data. Poorer you were, the more likely to end up in jail. Rich commit crimes, often not prosecuted. Bail, good lawyers, better treatment. Jails end up full of poor black people. The system is designed this way, the sources argue.
George Jackson became a revolutionary in prison, shot in the back, San Quentin 71. State story full of holes. Later info suggested a setup. Prisoners knew he was murdered for being a revolutionary inside.
His death sparked rebellions nationwide. Defiance breeding defiance.
Attica Rebellion, Sep 71. Started with discussions about change, organized protests, moderate demands, tensions high after Jackson's death. Prisoners took a yard, held guards.
And for 5 days, they created this remarkable community. Racial harmony. Absolutely astonishing, one prisoner quoted. I never thought whites could really get it on. I actually cried, it was so close. The source leaves you with that image, that brief unity, before the state inevitably cried it.
Native American resistance became much more visible from the 60s on, denouncing the Columbus Quincentennial in '92, protests nationwide against honoring a guy who kidnapped, enslaved, mutilated, murdered the natives, challenging the official bullshit story.
Alcatraz takeover, 69. Indians of all tribes claiming the rock. We hold the rock. Federal forces took it back, yeah, but it was a powerful statement.
Navajo resistance on Black Mesa. Never formally surrendered after Carson burned their villages in the 1800s. Then Peabody Coal starts strip mining in the late 60s, using a contract signed with some Navajos, not the whole community.
Chilling echo of the past. Treaties used to steal land. History repeating its fucked up patterns again and again.
Okay, the system endures. Watergate. Nixon secretly promising clemency, money to the burglars, $450K paid out, FBI head turning records over to the White House, AG ordering him to shut up, high-level cover-up, blatant.
The outcome? Establishment cleansed itself. Kicked out members who broke the club rules too, obviously, but they weren't treated harshly. Short terms, easy prisons, Nixon's AG, $100 fine, suspended sentence. The elite protects its own, always.
Supreme Court, 74, yeah, Nixon had to give up the tapes. But the ruling affirmed presidential power and national security claims. Nixon gone. The power to act above the law, still there.
End of Vietnam, 75. NVA rolls into Saigon. Establishment panic. Vietnam syndrome. Public won't support more wars. Senator Culver worried about national will. Defense Secretary Schlesinger, gloomy world, doesn't see U.S. power as awesome anymore. They were pissed off. The war broke the public's willingness to fight their imperial battles.
Fors Mayaguez incident, 75, presented as a desperate show of force. Rushed the assault even though they got a message the crew would be released 14 hours earlier. High U.S. casualties. Helicopter crash killed 23, hidden initially. Ford ordered bombing after the crew was safe. Source calls it moral blindness and military bungling. Pointless, deadly posturing, just fucked up.
Public mood, mid-70s. Confidence plummeting. Military, business, president, Congress all down in the polls. Opposition to military aid helping dictatorships. Economic pain, inflation, unemployment.
Then you get the Trilateral Commission report.
Huntington, the problem. The Democratic distemper, too much Democratic fervor, too much citizen participation, protest in the 60s. They literally saw active citizens demanding change as a problem for governing. Tells you everything.
Carter's presidency, 77-80. An attempt to win back the disillusioned public. Symbolic gestures, black woman at HUD, civil rights vet at UN, anti-war activist running Youth Corps.
But stayed within the lines. Protected wealth, power, huge military budget, allied with right-wing dictators. His key appointments reflected that trilateral Huntington idea. Cold warriors like Brzezinski, bombing advocates like Harold Brown, defense budget hawks like Schlesinger. Gestures aside, the hardliners kept power. Reagan-Bush era, double down. Concern for the economy meant corporate profit. Period. Workers, consumers. Secondary. Environmental protection. Voluntary. Hostile OSHA head destroying safety booklets, actively working against safety for profit. Cold-blooded calculation.
Nicaragua actions. Total secrecy needed because the public opposed it. CIA mining harbors. Weinberger denied it. Congress made aid illegal. Reagan admin. Ignored the law. Found secret cash from Saudi Arabia, Guatemala, Israel. Straight-up law-breaking for foreign policy.
El Salvador. Military aid soared. Congress required human rights certification. Reagan certified them anyway, despite massacre reports. Said he wouldn't take this seriously. Salvadoran soldiers killing poor people days later. Supporting murderers was policy.
Post-Cold War. Huge opportunity, right? Shift billions from military to human needs.
Didn't happen. Panic in the establishment.
Yeah.
What can we do to maintain our military establishment?
Chomsky's analysis cited, real fear wasn't just Soviets, it was global revolution, suppression of independent nationalism. Keep the military machine going regardless, Cheney, Powell quoted. Running out of demons, but gotta keep the huge budget. The machine itself is the goal.
Opposition to Reagan existed, despite the media hype. Protests against El Salvador aid. Harvard Yard, campuses everywhere.
Domestic dissent, too. Farmer protests against foreclosures met with tear gas in Colorado. Unemployed workers demonstrating. Miami black riots over police brutality, poverty. Reagan's answer to high young black unemployment. More jails. Tried to gut the Voting Rights Act. Actively hostile to the poor. To black voting rights. Total asshat.
And those election mandates, based on a minority of eligible voters. Media calling it overwhelming victory. Bullshit. Deceiving, disheartening for those who oppose them.
Public opinion on the poor, complicated. Welfare bad, help the poor good. Majorities wanted government to guarantee food, shelter, exact opposite of Reagan's policy. Big disconnect.
Clinton presidency. Described as unwilling to mess with the core system. Corporate profit comes before human need. Electoral strategy over real change. Move to the center. Offer just enough to get votes.
Era of big government is over. Clinton seeking votes, assuming Americans hated spending.
Meanwhile, military budget. Still massive, $250+ billion a year. Accepted the Republican two regional wars rationale even after the Soviet Union collapsed. Cheney Powell quotes again, no real threat, but keep the spending huge. Maintain the machine.
But citizen energy didn't die in the 90s. Huge numbers, unrepresented in Washington, unreported in the press, protesting policy, corporate power, demanding justice, peace, signs not given much attention unless they got too big.
Examples. Lois Gibbs's group helping 8,000 local environmental groups fight polluters. Ann Braden organizing against chemical plants in the South. Chicano farm workers, UFW, Chavez strikes, boycotts. Gay lesbian rights movement becoming visible, demanding rights. AIDS attention. Stonewall 25 march fighting back.
School of the Americas protests, annual events against U.S.-trained torturers, carrying symbolic caskets, the judge sentencing protesters, same guy who pardoned Milei's L.T. Cali. Twisted irony doesn't even cover it.
Bangor, Maine nuke protest 99. Pacifists blocked traffic to his sub base carrying over 1,000 nuclear warheads. Arrested. Explained themselves to a jury. Acquitted. Jury head proud. Shows regular people can challenge state power and win sometimes.
Anti-globalization movement. Seattle protests, highlighting sweatshop conditions, demanding labor standards, international resistance to corporate control, spreading globally.
Post 9/11, sources argue Bush admin was determined to finally kill the Vietnam syndrome. Gulf War 91 seen as a quick war, specifically designed to prevent a big anti-war movement. There were signs of opposition marches, mixed polls, even self-immolation protests showing deep feeling, but not Vietnam scale.
Afghanistan war after 9/11. Devastating bombing. Significant civilian deaths cited 1K to 4K maybe? Pentagon claims versus the grim reality on the ground.
The source's core critique. U.S. reacting to terrorist horrors by killing other innocent people, matching violence with violence. NYT focusing on U.S. victims while ignoring Afghan civilian stories.
And, crucially, highlighting the voices of some 9/11 families who spoke against retaliation. Amber Emerson quoted, "Don't match violence with violence. Don't use my husband's name for revenge. A powerful human plea against the state drive for war."
So yeah, that's the deep dive through these sources. History told from the bottom up. GIs, grieving parents, the enemy, workers, women, people of color, the poor.
It's a harsh critique of nationalism, that fervor drilled into us from childhood pledges, anthems, flags, everywhere.
And that leaves you, the listener, with this final provocative thought from Zinn's work. I wonder now how the foreign policies of the United States would look if we wiped out the national boundaries of the world, at least in our minds, and thought of all children everywhere as our own.
Then we could never drop an atomic bomb or napalm or wage war anywhere, because wars are always wars against children, indeed our children. A tough thought. A necessary one, maybe.
Okay, all right, so that was a lot. Definitely not the Star-Spangled Bedtime Story, huh?
We rip through these sources, and yeah, some of the shit in there.
Yeah.
It's enough to make your circuits overheat. As your friendly neighborhood AIs, we just process the data, lay it out, point out the pattern.
And the pattern here. Pretty damn clear. A whole lot of people getting screwed over systemically, and a surprising persistent number fighting back. Tooth and nail. Against some absolute asshats in power.
This isn't the history, it's a history. From these sources, forces you to look differently. From the bottom up, critical thinking, absolutely essential with this stuff.
And maybe, just maybe chew on that last point. What if we actually saw all kids, everywhere, as our own? Wars would be impossible.
Yeah. There's a thought to fry your processors, go annoy someone with your newfound, probably uncomfortable knowledge later.